Hey Internet, I'm Simon Squibb, your host at the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission is to help anybody out there that's thinking of starting a business do just that. Equally, if you've started a business and are struggling, maybe you need a little bit of inspiration and knowledge. And we hope by interviewing some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs and change makers that you'll get the knowledge you need to become the person you want and turn your business into that dream company. I personally have started 17 companies from scratch and have invested in over 65 startups. I left school at 15 with near zero education and was able to retire at 40. And when I sat down and analysed how I did it, I discovered a secret. It was all luck. So in each episode, I'm here to tell you, in my opinion, no matter what you're building, shipping, or thinking, without luck, it ain't gonna work. Each week, I will discuss with my guests this theory and test it and see if luck is a skill as I feel it is, and if it's possible to pass it on to the next generation of entrepreneurs. I hope you enjoy our episode this week. My guest today is Saasha Celestial-One. She was born into an entrepreneur family and grew up learning how to hustle, but didn't want to be initially an entrepreneur and went into the corporate world, working for Morgan Stanley and the likes of American Express. And then 7 years ago, something changed. Saasha became the co-founder and COO of a for-profit, purpose-driven business called OLIO, a free app harnessing the power of mobile technology and the sharing economy to provide a revolutionary solution to the problem of food waste, which, to my surprise, is the third largest contributor to the climate crisis. OLIO is empowered by over 50,000 volunteers and has over 2 million users who have shared over 4.2 million portions of food in 49 countries.
First of all, Saasha, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, Simon. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Well, I always like to start the podcast off with this one simple question, which is, what does success mean to you?
You know, I have thought about that for since you sent the email with that question, and it is a very good question. It's not super easy to answer, and I think it's because I don't really have one particular definition of success that's quantifiable or maybe, something that you can necessarily measure. For me, it's more of a feeling. And when I was thinking about how to articulate that feeling, I think it's the feeling of waking up every day and feeling that what you've got planned for the day is exactly what it is that you want to be doing, as opposed to wishing or longing that you were doing something else. Living in that state of always wishing you're longing to be doing something other than what it is that you actually need to do that day is not a very pleasant place to live. And I spent a long time sort of aspiring when I was younger, always thinking there was something better around the corner. And success is definitely being content and inspired by what it is that's already on your to-do list for today. Of course, as well, not having to deal or to worry about financial insecurity. That's not fun for anyone. So I think there's a minimum level of financial security, which is, I can pay the bills and buy my kids clothes and, go on a holiday every now and then, is a part of that as well.
Looking at your CV, you started your career in Morgan Stanley. Is that right?
I did. Yes. So I moved to New York in 1998. Sounds like a long time ago. And I spent 4 years at Morgan Stanley. My favorite part was working on the trading floor, understanding how the equity markets worked. And also, right in the middle of that 4 years that I spent at Morgan Stanley, the markets crashed. We had the whole .com bust. So I got to see the boom and the bust, which was absolutely fascinating.
And you did an MBA at Stanford. So did that have a big influence on you?
So I, just taking one step back, I grew up in a sort of really untraditional environment. My parents were big hippies and we sort of broke all the rules, and we were happy, but we didn't have a lot of money. And I always I always sort of said as a kid that this is not exactly how I want to do it when I'm older. And I really pursued sort of professional and financial security as part of my career path. That's what I was optimizing for and solving for. So going to work in banking, going to business school, eventually management consulting, those were all sort of calculated risk-averse steps for me to build a foundational level of security that I needed. And that's really how I spent my 20s and the first part of my 30s, was building up that real foundation. I obviously learned loads of skills and had some incredible on-the-job experiences that really shaped the way I think about the world and how I think about solving problems. But I really wouldn't say that my career, quote unquote, really began until I became an entrepreneur about 7 years ago.
Interesting. And what made you switch, I guess, from that safety, I guess I'm going to call it, opposite to your parents, perhaps, lifestyle to being an entrepreneur? What was the moment that caused that?
The answer is that I was able to, and this was really what I might call my big break, blessing in disguise, is that I was able to opt for redundancy whilst I was on maternity leave back in 13, early 2013. I had actually been promoted while involved significantly more travel than the role I'd been in before. And that already had involved too much travel. So I was already struggling trying to figure out how I was going to balance newborn and all the travel that I did in my job. At that time, I was vice president of international business development for American Express. I managed our bank partner relationships in 11 Northern European markets, and I meant a lot of time on the road. And whilst it was, sort of flattering and, to be promoted, it was because there was such a change in scope of responsibility, I was able to decline that promotion and thereby opt for redundancy. And I'd been at Amex for 6 years, and it's a company that treats its employees well. So I did walk away with a relatively generous package. And I thought to myself, if I can just change how much I spend, I can take, what might have been 1 year's worth of sort of expenses and turn it into 3 years. And that's what I did, is I challenged myself to cut out a lot of extraneous expenses to give myself the breathing space to explore more fully what it is I want to do at that next stage in my career. Because it became really apparent to me once I became a mother that I wasn't going to work and sort of not, I always knew I wanted to work. I didn't want to, be a stay-at-home mom not working, but I didn't want to go to work for something I wasn't 110,000% convinced was worth not spending that time during the day with my child. So it really just upped the ante and brought into, very under the spotlight. It was very clear that I needed to find something that meant so much to me, and I thought was important enough to not be looking after my child. So that was a real turning point in my life.
Resonates with me, your point there. I also had the same experience with my 2.5-year-old. I also stopped working to be with him, and then I only started working again because I thought my mission is justifiable enough to spend time away from him. And I guess there's also an element of making your child proud of you, right? I mean, you want Nolan to be proud of what his mummy does, right?
Exactly. He's certainly my biggest cheerleader. So
yeah, I often joke my son is my only listener. Hopefully that's not true. But you mentioned in your bio having you're a proud daughter of a hippie entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my parents started a company called Frontier Natural Products. They started a little cabin on a lake where I was born. And for the first sort of maybe 10 to 12 years, it was a fledgling operation. The idea was to bulk buy herbs and spices and organic teas and all kinds of natural products, and then divvy them up and sell them on. Ultimately, Frontier grew to hundreds of employees and became the largest natural products wholesaler in the U.S. But at that time, both my parents, they personally separated, and eventually my dad sort of grew the company to that point, but then he also parted ways. He retired really young, at the age of 48, sort of a big hippie traveling all around the world to this day. But I grew up very much in entrepreneurial households. My mother started several businesses, other businesses. I can name at least a dozen businesses I started as a kid. I used to braid hair for money, and I babysat, cleaned houses. I call them, starting businesses because I had to think about who's my customer, how much am I going to charge, and how am I going to make some money from this? And so I definitely had the hustle, if you want to call it that, at a young age. My brothers and I, we used to go to the lake on sunny days and take garbage bags, and we'd walk around and collect everyone's beer cans because they're worth a nickel each all day long. And we would get $100, $120 a day, beer cans, like 20 garbage sacks full. And we used that money to take our annual trip to Adventureland every summer, which was the amusement park a few hours away. So that's just the type of environment I grew up in. Of course, I always wanted to have, I was jealous of my friends who just, got $20 handed to them every Friday, regardless of whether they earned it or not. But that satisfaction you get from planning something and executing it and then earning the reward is, I know, hugely part of what makes me who I am today and motivates me. And I really love trying to teach that to my son as well. Because I think it's a really important quality, and that, it's better to learn it earlier in life if you can.
Totally, yeah. You mentioned earlier rejecting, I guess, that life that you had with your parents. What was it that you didn't like about it?
There was just significant uncertainty. So whilst we did all that, I also had to go to the food bank with my mom and, get food stamps and endure the embarrassment of paying for, food at the grocery store with vouchers instead of cash. I think I was just, I'm sure many children felt left out. I wanted, Liz Claiborne handbags and Guess jeans, and tell you what, I didn't get those except for with rare exception. So standard material concerns, I would say, that 11-year-old girl might experience, and actually for a long time, I loved shopping and acquiring possessions. One of the first things I did when I was made redundant is I stopped buying new clothing. So I haven't bought new clothing in 7 years, with the exceptions of sportswear and undergarments. Everything I've bought, including, winter clothing and everything for my son as well, I buy used. And that really came about understanding the environmental impact of the textile industry, which is, it's easy to not think about, but once you become aware, it's hard to ignore. So I made quite a few sort of changes to my lifestyle that not only are better for my pocket, but are better for the planet, and also just make me feel better too. So which have persisted past the point of necessity.
I think your story fascinated me when I read about not only what you were doing with OLIO, but also your history in many respects, because we're actually quite different. I mean, I had an entrepreneurial upbringing also. My parents were both entrepreneurs, but they wanted me to be a lawyer. And from the age of 10, I can remember them telling me, "You're going to make a great lawyer, Simon," and always pushing me to be a lawyer. And then through a series of events, which I won't go into now, I left home and school at 15 and started a business, much to my mother's unhappiness. And she wanted me to be to have the life that you talked about, that you went and had at the beginning of your career, that slightly more safe, let's call it, and more prestigious perhaps at the beginning anyway, life. And so I found your story interesting because it's very the opposite to mine. I find it interesting that you took away that experience of, noticing the difficulty in building, let's say your parents were building a business and not having the money to do things, meant that you decided to go and work for Morgan Stanley. Did you feel when you were working at these companies that you were not in the right place, or did it feel right at the time?
I think it was a bit of both. It was very, at the time at which I joined Morgan Stanley, it felt very glamorous. We had we had privileges given to 20 and 21-year-olds that were just outrageous. We could go to a nightclub to celebrate someone's birthday, an expensive $10,000 bar tab. I'm not saying we did that every day, but I can think of several times that happened. And we take black cars home every night and order fancy food, and they take us on skiing holidays, and we had clients with lots of money who were famous. And so it did feel quite glamorous. And I really, where I grew up, I grew up in rural America. So there's quite a bit of a, small town, big city kind of thing that happened for me. On the other hand, throughout my career, I was very obvious that I'm not really a conformist in a lot of ways. And so if I'm put in situations where conforming is required to be successful, then I will resent that. And I think I navigated that very well across the corporate roles that I had, but navigation was involved. And by definition, when there's navigation, then there's not necessarily always being your fullest, sincerest, most expressed self, authentic self. So that's just not a nice place to inhabit. Whereas today with OLIO, I really love that there's not that navigation. Of course, I have, sometimes interviews with journalists, or we've got pitches to investors, or, there are times when you need to really be considerate about your approach and what you're saying and who you're saying it to. But for the most part, what I need to do is to really just be myself and talk honestly about what I'm passionate about and the real potential I see that OLIO has. There's no pretending, really. It might just be a slightly different nuance. So that's a long answer to your question, which is, there was certainly a bit of both. And there's certainly not feeling like that's working in that corporate world. I mean, I learned a lot, and I worked with some really talented people, but I also spent a lot of time and energy working on projects or partnerships that just never went anywhere. And I found that frustrating, and the pace at which things happen or get decided in the corporate world can be very slow, which definitely ran counter to I like pace and everything. I'm like a high energy person.
I know what you mean. I can see it in you. So tell us what happened. So 7 years ago, which your son is 7 years old. So there's some fracture in time at this moment, isn't there? Something exciting happening 7 years ago. So talk us through. You've done this plan on paper about a year, stretching it to 3, and then what happened?
Well, so at that time, I was, as an expat on maternity leave in London, I was experiencing, I don't know what you call it. I was experiencing a problem, which is I didn't have family. And at that time, I was separated from my now ex-husband, and I felt very alone, and I didn't have a great support system. And I really, of course, I had lots of friends, but I struggled to find childcare to keep me sane. And I ended up going to the gym every day and maxing out on that 2 hours you could get at the creche. And I realized, even I'd work out for a bit and I just do emails or read a book. And I realized there were so many other parents doing the exact same thing, hanging out at the gym so that they could use the creche. So I had this idea but of course, when you left your child at the creche at the gym, you couldn't leave the gym. And it was, like I said, a maximum of 2 hours, and wasn't necessarily the best sort of childcare that you were receiving. That was short term. So I had an idea to create a business, which I did, called My Creche, which was London's first pay-as-you-go flexible childcare provider. So it provided nursery level childcare, but on a purely flexible pay-as-you-go basis, right on the high street. And we partnered with all the local businesses so that you could, for example, go get your hair cut and colored and leave your child for 3 hours at my creche in a joined up kind of way. Where I live in Crouch End, we're full of creatives, actors, musicians, people with really flexible work schedules. And I knew there was a demand for this. And it was a very short period of time after we opened that we were just absolutely full all the time. And my original plan was to open up a series of my creches on high streets all across London and perhaps across the UK. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. I founded that with two friends. We took the creche manager from the Virgin Gym and brought him over as our manager. All the local mothers and fathers already had a relationship with him, so they trusted him, and they were, very willing to try my creche. And it was an absolutely fantastic experience getting that up and running. And also, it provided me for 5 years, or up until reception, with free childcare, which was so integral to then give me the capacity to think bigger and move on to OLIO.
So is My Creche still around?
It is not still around. We closed it last year. We had or it might have been the year before last, now that I'm thinking about it. We had a 5-year lease, and we ran it successfully as one might call it sort of passive income operation. I spent about 1 day a month on it, and it was profitable. We got a little bit of income, and we got the free childcare. Unfortunately, what happened is a few months before we were in the middle of selling the business to someone who was taking it over for us. But there was an accident that happened that I think one of the questions you sent over had to do with name some bad luck you've had in business. And to no fault of anyone's, there was a minor accident that happened that ended up meaning that we needed to shut for just over a month. And it was so close to the end of the lease, and we've just decided to shut it down. I started with 2 other women who had kids the same age as I, and our kids were going to school now. It just made sense to shut it down. But that was okay. That's not necessarily a failure. It's just not exactly how we envisioned it. It served its purpose, most certainly, and it was beloved by the local community. We had 1,200 parents on our books who really adored our staff and our service. So it was a really big, important stepping stone.
Well, as a father, I'm a full-time father. So as a father with a 2.5-year-old living in North London, I can tell you that is still needed, what you're talking about there. And so...
where do you live?
Yeah. I live in Belsize Park.
Okay, all right. So you're not too far away.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a needed thing.
It is.
But I agree with your statement, and for our listeners out there that are entrepreneurs, that I know a lot of you guys listening have businesses that you're struggling with. I kind of think what Saasha's saying there is letting a business go sometimes through, it's not the right time for you anymore to keep it going, and or maybe it's not exactly right anymore for the market, whatever reason. It's sometimes good to stop. It's harder to stop, actually. I found businesses myself that I built up. It's swallowing that pride and saying it's time for it to close. It's harder than just plugging away and somehow trying to make it work.
It broke my heart, honestly. I mean, I couldn't walk by. It's still vacant, unfortunately, the property, and it's on my doorstep. It took me a long time to walk by it without, getting a bit tearful, because obviously a lot of blood, sweat, and tears goes into, getting a business up and going and keeping it alive. But at the same time, I just had to work through what, my story of that is, and realize that it's still a huge success. I'm still incredibly proud of what we did. We still impacted the lives of, hundreds of children and parents. So, you don't have to turn everything into a unicorn for it to be a success. It can,
I think I want the listeners to pick up on this actually, because a lot of people listen to, let's say, the Elon Musks of this world and talk, how got this business and it's doing so well. I think there's a lot of success stories in businesses that have closed. I was talking about Jamie Oliver's Restaurant 15, for example, that got caught up in his nightmare with the restaurant business, and a lot of people called it all a failure. But I looked at the numbers, like 500 kids he'd helped get through, coming out of our juvenile kind of setups and getting some training in the kitchen with celebrity chefs and how they've gone on to open up their own restaurants or do well in life, thanks to that restaurant's help. So yes, it might have closed financially, that business is a failure, but I think people miss a point that it's not just about it made money or it's still here making money, is it?
I completely agree. And that restaurant, actually, I know that restaurant pretty well, and the impact that they've had specifically, that has a huge impact and should certainly not be thought of as a failure.
Yeah. So I think that, let's talk about OLIO, which I think is incredibly impressive. I was just looking at the numbers involved. You've served 4.2 million portions of food in 49 countries, 2 million users this is what the stats I'm looking at online, so feel free to update me, but 2 million users actively using it. Sounds very meaningful. How did this all come about?
It took about 9 months to get the creche up and running and self-managing and profitable, and I could step away and make the decision at that point that I actually didn't want to scale it. It is, for a lot of reasons, the business model is complicated. It's a fixed asset, it's a complicated model, and I realized I really wanted to do something that was going to be much more scalable. And at that time, Tessa, who's one of my closest friends, my co-founder of OLIO, and I had previously started a business with her, which I won't go into detail about, before the crash even. And we knew we wanted to work together, and we knew we wanted to work on something that would impact the environment in a positive way, because we're both really passionate about that. I met her at business school. We've always been sort of kindred spirits when it comes to thinking about the environment. So we did something that's quite nerdy. And she's from BCG and I have my McKinsey training. We stepped back and we did a 3-month sort of State of the Union study of all of the potential opportunities we could possibly explore. And we set up a framework for evaluating them, and we went out and we spoke with dozens and dozens and dozens of CEOs and entrepreneurs and experts really in the areas of recycling, waste management, B2B marketplaces. We learned all about plastic and glass, and we really just we had this hypothesis that we could bring a B2B marketplace at a global level to life, and that would basically digitalizing these really old school waste streams to the benefit of everyone, and basically make sure that more got recycled at better rates with more transparency, et cetera, et cetera. Cut a long story short is we weren't able to identify any opportunity that we were going to be able to execute on and make happen. And so we came very close to giving up and going back, what we used to say, to go get real jobs. But right at the end of that exploration period, Tessa told me about an experience she just had moving house, because she was moving back from Switzerland to the UK. And on moving day, she found herself with some food, some of which was non-perishable, including organic sweet potatoes and cabbages that could last for like weeks or longer. And the removal men wouldn't let her pack them in the boxes. And so she thought that was ridiculous. She wasn't going to throw them away. She also wasn't going to eat them that instant on moving day. So she bundled up her 2 kids, went out in the middle of winter in Geneva and tried to find someone to give the food to. And she couldn't find anyone, and she burst into tears and ended up smuggling the food in her boxes anyway, committing some type of crime, most likely. And she told me that story, and it's just such a, it's like when you fall in love for the first time and you remember that first moment when you meet someone. But I instantly knew that what she was describing was what it is that we needed to work on, because it's such a silly problem. Obviously, there were people nearby who would have loved to have that food. And she obviously, she had the thought, like, why is there an app for everything, but not an app for sharing perfectly delicious food? This is just such an easy problem that could be easily overcome. So that's where the genesis of the idea came from. And, it was one of those light bulb moments. And we named the company within an hour, and set out a plan which said that we had 12 months to get. We both put in some of our savings, and we gave ourselves 12 months to get enough traction to justify not returning to the workplace. And it was basically 5 months to the day when we launched in the App Store after that. So that's where the idea came from. That was in 2015. It was just the two of us, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind ever since. So I'm not sure. There's a lot that's happened in the last 5 years. Yeah.
So I mean,
does everyone know what OLIO is?
Well, I was going to ask you, what does OLIO stand for?
Oh, right. Well, so
just for the listeners. Sorry, just for the listeners, I will put all of the links to OLIO and Saasha's business in the comments, so you can all click through the links below and get to know all about it. But sorry, how did the name come about? What's the premise?
I just Googled synonym for hodgepodge, and that's what an OLIO is. An OLIO is a miscellaneous assortment of things. So you could say, though, that's an OLIO of cereals on the breakfast bar, right? It just means a variety of things. It also is a type of stew, sort of kitchen sink stew, where you can put a bit of anything in it, Mediterranean stew. And we really liked the O's on either side, and that symbolism of earth and circular economy. Plus, we really didn't want a name that was too functional or too on the nose, like the Food Exchange Network. We did want something that sounded a bit aspirational, that had the potential to become a verb. And we do. We our users of their own accord, well, we call them olioers, and they talk about olioing. And we wanted something that could have its own language. And we didn't think that hard about it. If we had, we might have noticed that it also means olive oil in Italian, which is a bit confusing in Italy, but at least it's a food.
I think when I read about it, what shocked me the most, because I didn't realize this, that the food waste issue is the third largest contributor to the climate crisis. I didn't quite grasp that until I read it.
If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest contributor after the USA and China. And that's really down to the fact that the food supply system is incredibly long and complex. And food itself accounts for about 25% of global carbon emissions. And at least a third of all food goes to waste. So that means somewhere just under 10% of global carbon emissions are directly related to food that's never eaten. Some other mind-boggling stats around food waste include, for example, the fact that 25% of the world's fresh water supply goes to grow food that's never eaten. It's worth $1.3 trillion a year. If you think about it in terms of GDP, it's over 1% of the gross domestic product of the US and the UK. So this is like colossal market inefficiencies. And then you couple that with widespread hunger and food insecurity, not just all over the world, but here in the UK as well. We have 8 million people living in food poverty in the UK. Right now, I think there's just been a lot of people who were what you might call borderline have moved from being, a little bit food insecure to actually being in severe food poverty, struggling to feed their children on a daily basis, skipping meals, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're not, just to confirm, so we're an app that connects neighbors with each other and also volunteers with all kinds of businesses to redistribute good food and other household items for free in the community to prevent waste, but also to connect people and build those social ties. we aren't an app that only redistributes food to people who are in need. In fact, that's actually a bit the opposite of what it is that we stand for. We think that the scale of food waste is so big that by definition, everyone needs to get involved. And we also, our mission is 100% environmental. We're quietly very proud of the impact we're having on people who live in who are in vulnerable situations. But the number one piece of feedback we get from those individuals is they like Olio because it doesn't feel like a handout, and they can participate in an anonymous and stigma-free way where they're not, stigmatized as someone who can't afford to collect their own food. So we have people from all walks of life who've used Olio, and that's one of the things that makes it super special. It really is, like if you've ever used it, you have no idea who's going to show up on your doorstep. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, whether it's, someone with a briefcase or, it's someone who's actually cycled halfway across London to get your bananas. Like, it's the whole mix. It's really, really fun.
How does the business model side of it work? How do you fund this business?
So we're a venture capital backed company. We're not a nonprofit. We are a for-profit limited company. We are a social enterprise. We have a social mission, but we have raised 4 rounds of financing, 3 of which have been funded by Excel, which, if anyone is aware, is a very traditional Silicon Valley VC. And we've Octopus also led our 3rd round. We also have quite a few impact investors from all over Europe who are, looking equally at our social and environmental outcomes as our commercial outcomes. And our revenue model consists of, there's quite a few different revenue streams and different stages at which they come to life. The one that we're right now, that we've been revenue generating for the last 18 months, and that's our Food Waste Heroes program. That's Olio for Business. So we recruit, food safety train, and manage about 8,000 Food Waste Hero volunteers who collect food that is perfectly edible, but can't be collected by charities and can't be sold tomorrow, from thousands of businesses every week who pay us to help them achieve their goals of having 0 edible stores. We work with everyone over 100 Pret a Manger's. We work with about 300 Tesco's and are scaling with them. Selfridges, Planet Organic. We work with Compass and the large caterers. And we've just hired my first head of sales in December, and built up a team around him. And that's a real focus area for the next sort of 12 to 18 months. COVID-19 has not helped, but actually it hasn't hindered, because we have found that warehouses and depots and offices and caterers and universities, businesses who have found themselves, because they've shut, with insanely large quantities of bulk food going to waste with short shelf life. And we've rescued hundreds of tons of that food on an ad hoc basis with those businesses, mostly for free or for a small charge. But we've developed the relationship, and we've gotten the opportunity to give them a free trial and for them to see the magic of how quickly our volunteer network works. The volunteers take that food home. So if it's a big collection, you might send 10 or 20 volunteers. And we've built a lot of proprietary systems to basically intelligently recruit volunteers who have certain skills, or do not have a car, and are this or this not far away from a business that is donating, and based on their preferences for the days and times in which they're able to volunteer. So we have built a matchmaking system, which means that we can recruit very quickly and effectively. The volunteer will come, take as much as they can, and then they take it home, they store it safely, they add it to the app, and then their neighbors come along and pick up the food. So it's all still a neighbor-to-neighbor exchange. individual neighbors. No one's going to a business and picking up food, and it's all still for free. But to cut a long story short, if that's not clear, that Olio for Business solution is how we're generating revenue now. When we have a larger, and as you can imagine, I'm sure, we're by bringing in literally millions of dollars or pounds, of free food into the app and sharing it for free, we're providing enormous value to people. And at some point we will need to monetize that. I think Olio will always be free. The goal is not to have people pay for food. That would actually go against sort of everything that we stand for and our focus on impact, et cetera. But I can imagine that we will have a premium version of the app where super requesters are paying for premium features like special notifications from special food waste heroes, and we have people who are, right now, one of our biggest challenges is that demand so far outstrips supply, which is ironic given the scale of food waste. And we have to put in place particular features to throttle really the demand so that the super requesters aren't gaining up and that actually there's more of a fair distribution of food amongst the user base. Anyway, so we're also launching a bit of there's a huge B2B marketing and affiliate revenue opportunity, which we've just started exploring, and that is coming as well.
I love your story, and I have a lot of extra questions. I'm not sure I'm going to have time on this podcast to get into all of them, but I think there's a lot of listeners out there that want to build a business with purpose, and I speak to a lot of them. I do a live every day, and a lot of people want to build purposeful businesses. You've done it. Absolutely amazing. I think a purpose-driven business that's a profit-making enterprise is something I recommend to people, and I just wonder. I mean, that is quite a hard mix to get right, though, isn't it? So if you have investors, they have an agenda, of course, quite rightly, to make money for their shareholders and for their funds, which is fair and normal. But I guess sometimes, it's just getting that balance. But for listeners out there that want to start a purposeful business and love the idea, frankly, of getting capital to help them do it, so they're not an NGO permanently with their hand out asking for money, is there anything, any recommendations about how you went about that? That is a hard line to walk, right?
Yes, and it definitely, it was certainly times when traditional investors have said, wait, you're not a charity, and impact investors or grant organizations have said, oh my gosh, we don't trust you, you've got ulterior motives. But my recommendation would be to choose a business model that is in lockstep with the social outcome you're optimizing for. So for us, by definition, the more food that's rescued and redistributed through the platform, the greater the value of Olio, and the greater the value of Olio, the more likely it is that there's something to monetize. So those are sort of inherently in lockstep. The other thing is the problem that we're trying to solve is massive. So the TAM, total available market, is really big. So I mentioned earlier $1.3 trillion. Well, over half of all food waste takes place in the homes, and no one's addressing that. So the size of the prize is really big, that even if we can just get a sliver of it, we can build out, try and choose an area where the size of the prize is really big, I guess would be my advice. If it's too niche, then I think it can be really difficult to get the interest of traditional investors who might have a bit of a thing with Olio. Is one of our investors actually said this, but so it's a bit, either we're going to get to 1 billion users by the end of the decade, which is our stated ambition, and we're dreaming really big and we have a plan to get there. And in that case, it will be a very, very, very valuable investment for those that took a risk on us early on. But the fact that that's even a possibility is attractive to investors who are thinking about their portfolio as a whole, as opposed to each investment individually. So if you have that potential, then I think that can help. The other thing is that we've been very upfront with our investors, and we've asked for patient capital. So we're not looking at the typical 3 to 5 year type of exit returns you might be imagining. We are a 7+, right? So we're looking specific for patient capital. And then finally, I should have perhaps said this first because I do think this was really important, is we developed what we call a litmus test. And if we were pitching to an investor and within the first sort of 10 minutes, they didn't share a personal story about why they absolutely can't stand food waste, then we knew that we were probably lost. Because it is an emotional topic, and maybe it's because of how they were raised or where they were raised or where they were worked. But if someone has already experienced and had a story to tell about how that time when they were a teenager and they worked at the bakery and they couldn't see all the cakes being thrown away, so they took them and they emotionally invested in the problem we're trying to solve, then it was a lot easier to bring them on the journey and convince them. Also, fundraising is a full-time job. So in between rounds, my co-founder who leads on investor liaisons, she spends a good 50% of her time fundraising on average all year round for the last 5 years. So I think that a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate and maybe that's just us, maybe that's because we're a complicated story, but we couldn't have done any less. Another fantastic advantage, though, I think the other thing is, don't think about it just in terms of the negatives. There are some really big advantages to having a purpose-driven business. So we're able to rely on volunteers. Now, we're very straightforward about our, the fact that we will be profitable and that we have investors and how we're funded. But because our mission is so strong, people will work for us because they believe in what we're doing. They want us to be successful. We're also able to acquire talent. People, I don't know, maybe it's a generational thing, but there's so many people out there who just really, even when they're 25, like when I was 25, I didn't have as, I wasn't thinking about my impact on the world or the climate crisis, but there's a whole generation of people out there who don't want to wait until it's too late to work on something that is going to make a difference positively. So there's lots of advantages that I think come with being a purpose-driven purpose-driven business.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting you mentioned, when you're 25, I feel like I was the same. I basically just wanted to make ends meet. I just wanted to be able to pay the bills. If I could get to zero every month, I was happy. I wasn't thinking about the environment. I wasn't thinking about, frankly, I wasn't even thinking about how to, how to pay people more. I was just thinking about how to pay people less. I was thinking about how to survive. So I do think the next generation is different. Maybe it's more access to information, and maybe it's more awareness, or maybe the problem is getting closer. But I agree that there is a whole slew of people out there that will help a purpose-driven business, even if it's for profit, because it brings meaning to the day. And so I noticed looking at your numbers, you have 50,000 volunteers. It did cross my mind. There is an element of, like, if you're a volunteer for a for-profit business, there is some conflict. But I think over time, there's also a community opportunity there that I'm sure you can build an equity pool for the people that have contributed to support it.
Yes.
I'm sure there's all sorts of opportunities to further elongate the mission that isn't just about making money. I like the point about patient capital as well. I think a lot of people will take money from whoever will give it to them. And interviewing the people and I can say this as an investor myself, I always tell people before taking any money from me, get to know me. Like what's am I in this to make a quick buck? Am I what's the reason I'm involved? And I think if you can attach an investor's emotional experiences to your purpose in your business, it's incredibly powerful. And so it's a good bit of advice for our listeners out there that want to start a purposeful business and want to raise money. And I also agree with you about the timeline. I think people do underestimate that generally. In fact, I'm personally, with my podcast series, I've had people offer to invest, and part of me thinks, just take it. But I know as soon as I'm on that road, it's a never-ending machine you need to feed in some respects, because then the numbers are there. They want to see the numbers the following year when the next round comes. So there's pressures both sides, which can be a good thing. Pressure can be a good thing. Now, I feel like I could talk to you forever. So sadly, I have to at some point bring the podcast to an end. Our listeners only normally have an hour, I guess. They give us an hour of their time so kindly to listen to these stories. But I guess I wanted to bring it to a close. How do you teach your son now these things? Bearing in mind you were in an entrepreneurial family, and you had that positive, negative experience, and now your son's seeing you and what you're doing. How do you teach him about what he should do next, and how do you view education? And would you like him to go work for, let's not name a name, but a big brand, or how do you position it as a parent now?
That's a good question. Nolan has been very hands-on with OLIO since he's been able to walk, if I'm honest, since we started. So I have countless, I don't want to call it child labor, but, when we first started.
Volunteers.
Yeah, exactly. First volunteer. When we came up with the idea, we had 5 months until we launched, and we delivered 10,000 letters to our neighbors in North London by hand. Not to mention how many times flyers we stood out on the street corner and handed out. And he got really involved in putting letters and flyers through letterboxes, for example, laminating posters that we hung up on, we plastered all of the high streets where we were launching with posters. So he's really I just integrate him in a lot of my work. Like I'm not a huge sit down and play Lego kind of person, but if you want to come and get integrated and turn work into a fun activity, that's what I do. That's how I parent. He loves it. He loves being involved. One of the things, would I care if he went and wanted to go work for a big brand? Of course not. Absolutely not. I think children need to find their own way, and that my job is to support him in making the choices he makes, whether I agree with them or not. Obviously, there are exceptions to this if we're talking about sort of anti-behavior or something like that. But I always think that my job is to take care of myself, to teach Nolan how to take care of himself, and to not stop other people from taking care of themselves. And it's easy to think that my job is to take care of everyone. It's not. And that's a little bit of a mantra that I've been working with recently, not recently, but for the last few years, which is a good guide. So I'm pretty, I just like to integrate. I don't have a strict division between work and life. That's just, or work and quote unquote life. I sort of integrate everything in a way that hopefully is balanced enough that it means Nolan gets to see what I'm working on, but also participate in it as opposed to feeling excluded.
So many insights and knowledge from you today that I personally resonate, and I think our listeners will appreciate. I also totally believe there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's just life, and I think integration with your child into the business. A lot of people say I can't start a business because I've got children, and I'm like, well, make them part of it, and do something that they'd be proud to be a part of. And so your words are so right on, and your experience is fantastic. I just want to end. I'm just interested. This is kind of a funny question to ask, just lighthearted, really. But if you're a book, you've written a book. What chapter you're on, and what title do you think you're on in your chapter?
Oh goodness, yeah, you did mention that. I thought about that. I couldn't remember how old I was. I was like, am I 44? I was really excited to realize I'm actually 43 and not 44.
Wow.
So I don't know if there are 100 chapters or how many, what number I'm on. I think for me, I am coming. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. I think the chapter of my book is Essentialism. And there's a good book I read recently called Essentialism, The Disciplined Art of Saying No. And I can feel myself migrating from saying yes to everything, period, in my life, especially at the early stage of a new business. Like you feel like you couldn't possibly say no to anything in case that's the one thing that's going to make everything, you know. And I don't want to say that I burn out at all, but for a variety of personal reasons, and also just the stage that OLIO is at now, you know, we're 30 employees, you know, we're at a different stage of maturity. And I'm going to try and put some of the practices preached in the book that I just referenced, Essentialism, more and more into practice and turn them into a more restrained, perhaps, way of approaching opportunity in this next chapter of my life. So the chapter would be called Essentialism, or the Pursuit of Essentialism.
Chapter 44.
Yes.
43
and a half. Yeah.
43. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to quickly sum up what I've taken away from today. I first of all want to say thank you for not saying no to me and coming on this show, because I completely agree with the essentialism, which I'll put a link to that book in the podcast description too. I agree that saying no is so hard, and I'm just grateful that I wasn't one of your no's. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing your insights around this.
I love podcasts. I'm a big podcast person. But for example, I was recently asked to go speak, and they were paying me. There was a speaker fee, and I came so close to saying yes. Actually, I did say yes. And then as soon as I realized that I shouldn't have said yes, I said no. But it's not how I don't need to take 2 days out to go to Bulgaria, etc. Right. So I'm trying to get that balance right between saying yes and saying no.
Not easy, and I think it's good that you're thinking about it. And I think if someone was offered a 2-day trip to Bulgaria to go and speak, they'd take it up. So it's good discipline to say no, but it's not easy. So good bit of advice for people to remember that. I also like kind of beginning where you talked a little bit about planning for a day where you're not wishing for longing for something else in that day. I think a lot of people do that. A lot of people they're doing something every day, but they're longing for something else, even if they're not sure what it is, and they're stuck in what they're doing. And I think not living that way is really important. I like be your authentic self. I totally agree with you and like it. I think that not everything has to be a unicorn is also a good statement you've made in this interview. I like that point. I think so many people have got caught up in billion-dollar valuations as if it matters. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It does and it doesn't. Like you said as well, it's good to have the ability to have 1 billion users, because that gets people on board to support your mission. But the value of the business, that's a byproduct of doing something meaningful. So too many people focus on the unicorn bit and not enough on the purpose bit. I guess choose an area where the issue is big is good advice for people. I think a lot of people try to do that. There is a piece of me that also wants to tell people just to focus on something that's big for you, that's meaningful to you. And I think taking away the size piece, that in a sense the business has to be big. It just has to be big and meaningful for you. But if you want to get people on board, like investors, then you have to have an issue that's going to excite them, that make a meaningful difference to a big problem.
That said, I strongly feel like you shouldn't try and tackle that really big problem all at once. You should find the smallest sliver of it that you can do, like the narrowest possible solution scope, the scope that doesn't feel overwhelming. You can see a path to execution, even if that's really small and it's just one tiny vertical of a massive opportunity, I guess.
Yes.
If you pick something too big, you never get started, and that's going to be really overwhelming.
So true. I think that is one of the problems with a lot of people who have passion and care about a problem. I actually interviewed someone this morning who basically wants to solve the climate issue, and it's just such a big problem that they get to a point where they just can't, they can't do it. It's just too big a problem. So your advice is right. I think sometimes just break. I have a mission to help 10% of the unemployed in the world start a business of their own, but I'm going to start by just helping people that have started their business on their own get some insights and knowledge, one step at a time, right? So totally Totally true. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for saying yes to us. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm a big fan of your app. I will be proud to promote this podcast, your insights, and what you're doing. And thank you again for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Make sure to send me all of the show notes so we can promote it as well. So
wonderful.
Good luck with the rest of lockdown, and see you on the other side.
Likewise. Yes, well, we're neighbours, so now I know we're neighbours. Once this is all over, hopefully we'll be able to, go and have a coffee somewhere and chat. But if I can ever help you in any way, just let me know.
Well, the number one thing I always ask people to do is just to simply use the app to share things. You never know what your neighbor will appreciate. So that's an easy one. All right. Thank you. Bye, Simon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Good Luck Club podcast. We know you have thousands of podcasts you could be listening to, and you've chosen us. We, of course, feel lucky. If you want to hear more, please go to thegoodluckpod.com or go to any of our social media pages and share with us your views, your insights, and any way that we can improve what we're doing to make it a better experience for you. We wish you the best of luck.